This is one of the biggest reasons why I see many people never invest in property. And it's not interest rates, and it's not property prices, and it's not even borrowing capacity. It's actually the way they're looking at the problem. Having worked with investors for over 20 years, I've seen plenty of people rule themselves out before they've even got started. So they look at a property, they look at the repayments, they look at the holding costs, and they go, well, that's going to cost me a couple of $100 a week. And then that's it. They kind of give up there. The issue is, however, it's the way they're looking at the problem. They're only looking at one way to fund that investment. What they're not looking at structure, and they're not looking at strategy. And they're not looking whether there might be another way to actually own that asset without actually taking hundreds of dollars a week out of their household budget and draining their cash flow. And that's often something people don't look at. Not because they're doing anything wrong. It's simply because no one's shown you a different way to look at things, because you don't know what you don't know. I'll give you a recent example. We recently worked with a client who wanted to invest in a property. And like most people, they found a property they liked, they ran the numbers and concluded it was going to cost them around $500 a week out of pocket to hold that property. So at that point, they were pretty much ready to pass on that property. So instead, we actually took a step back and said, okay, is there another way to do this that they could actually buy the property and actually still make it affordable for them so it wasn't going to drain their cash flow? And the key thing, once we got all their numbers, is we actually saw an opportunity that they hadn't been thinking about. And the scenario we put forward to them was, have you considered actually doing a self-managed super fund as a way to buy that property? And so the benefit for them with the self-managed super fund was between the tenant and the contributions they were already putting into their super, and also what they'd be able to get off the tax office. That property could be completely self-funding without any money going out of their pocket at all. The other thing is, because of the funds that actually built up inside their superannuation, they actually had money to put forward towards that purchase without even touching the equity in their home at all. So the whole situation could be completely self-funded. Now look, self-managed super funds are not going to be right for everyone. And this is not me giving you specific advice to say, rush out and do a self-managed super fund tomorrow. But in this situation, the structure actually changed the outcome for them. The deposit was coming from their super, the property sat inside super, the rent flowed back into the super, and the employer contributions continued flowing into that super as they normally would. So instead of the shortfall coming out of their weekly household budget, the tenant and the super fund were doing the heavy lifting. Same property, just different structure and different result. And with that, they were able to keep moving forward without needing to find like another $500 a week out of their cash flow, which then would have put back their plans in terms of paying off their home loan debt and funding their other objectives. If we can lower those holding costs, it's going to be much easier to hold than property long term. And if you can stay in the game longer, then clearly you can get the benefits that come from it. The problem in a lot of cases is people buy property that actually puts way too much pressure on their cash flow. And then other things that they weren't anticipating come up. They get interest rate moves, suddenly the kids have expenses, or there's repairs, and suddenly that property becomes a bit of a drain on the cash flow, becomes much harder to hold, and typically they end up having to quit out of that asset much earlier than they'd like to, and they don't get the payoff that comes with it. And this matters because most people aren't just looking at property for the sake of owning property. They're looking at property because they're actually trying to solve a bigger problem. Often they've looked at their situation, they've looked at what's in their super, and they've realized that that's going to not be enough. It's not going to flip them in the situation that they want to be by the time they have to retire. There's usually a gap there. And for what I see for most people, the shortfall that they need to make up over the next 15 to 20 years, somewhere between 1 to 2 million. So we're talking pretty big numbers there. That means they've still got a lot of heavy lifting to do outside of super to get into a position where they want to go. If you think about it realistically, what are going to be your options to do that? And you rule property out in that situation pretty early on. You might actually be cutting out one of the best options to actually get there. So look, this isn't me saying rush out and set up a self-managed super fund tomorrow. Certainly not saying that at all, because a super fund and self-managed super fund is an area that definitely needs advice to work out whether it's going to be appropriate for you or not. And it's certainly not something that fits for everyone. The key thing to understand is that there can be different approaches and different structures you can use that can actually make that more manageable. So if you found that interesting, you might want to have a look at this next video coming up. It'll actually step you through a real example of a client and a recent purchase they did. where the holding cost on that actually came out at just $20 a week. So, which is getting pretty close to neutral. So there should be a link on the screen or somewhere there you'll be able to click through and actually have a look at that as well. And that'll give you a bit more idea on how we sort of look at property and how we're structuring things to try and keep hold costs low.